I'm Stephen Robinson. Welcome to the Play Typer Guy podcast. Joining me today is Lindsey Boylan, who in 2021 was the first of several women to accuse former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo of sexual harassment. Cuomo would eventually resign under collective pressure from Democrats at the state and national level. Now, Cuomo is running for mayor of New York, where he's leading in most polls. This might seem a shocking turn of events in a reality where Donald Trump, a convicted felon and adjudicated rapist, had not returned to the White House. But unfortunately, in this reality, this sort of thing is happening more often than we would like. However, Lindsey isn't sitting silently while Cuomo stages a comeback. She's doing everything she can to stop it. Thank you for joining me again, Lindsey. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I know I was surprised, perhaps naively so, when Cuomo resurfaced. What was your reaction at the time when you learned he was running for mayor?
I wasn't, I knew he would resurface. His entire kind of reason for being is in politics. I don't think he knows any other way of being. And I don't think the staff that has stayed loyal to him have any other interest than seeing him back in power. So I knew that he would attempt this self, renovation, reputation washing. I was initially surprised at that he did decide to run in New York City's mayor's race. I think it just shows you what degree to which our city is in crisis of leadership because he candidly, to my experience, hates New York City. He hates being in the city. He spent as much time as he could away from it when he was governor. He doesn't like to be accountable to people, and New York City is probably there's no place more seriously taken than the mayor's office and how he or she has to be accountable to the citizens of the city, whether or not they like it. And so I was shocked that he ultimately jumped in. I knew he was going to rear his ugly head and try to come back into power. And I don't think if he had any other option, if there was even an inkling that he could take on Hochul and the governor's mansion, he would do that first. This is a last resort. And it's because he views Eric Adams as floundering. So I think it says more about that than it does any interest he has in actually helping the city. And in fact, we can get into this, he spent most of his career taking resources away from the city, using the city and its leaders as political leverage, and trying to diminish the mayor of New York City throughout his tenure in Albany.
Yeah, he's sort of an odd choice in that regard because Adams' issues are considerable, but Cuomo has just as many in the sense of how he has undermined New York, undermined the Democratic Party in New York, it worked against the party in many ways. So I'm surprised that I get the idea that Adams isn't working, but the idea that Cuomo's the answer to it had surprised me.
And I think, he's really, I don't think he's particularly intelligent from a policy standpoint. He's not particularly focused, ethical, and none of these things is he known for. He is known for being shameless and also a tactician of, how to weasel his way into power. I mean, he managed his dad's campaigns once upon a time. That is his upbringing. And so I think he's made the calculus that people will not remember and not be focused on him in this election and simply think about their unhappiness with the current mayor and equate him to someone who's going to take on Trump. But of course, on that front, he hasn't taken on Trump in any meaningful way in his career. And in fact, they share a donor base at this point. Um, they also, he's also more conflicted than Eric Adams is in terms of potential legal jeopardy. I mean, Eric Adams had this um, cloud hanging over him of potential prosecution that New Yorkers, to some extent, rightfully said, is he really independent? Can he be independent from what Trump is telling him to do, whether it be with ICE, whatnot? But Cuomo has actually been referred for criminal prosecution by the COVID Select Committee. He's also been found to be responsible for harassing 13 women, more than what either the Attorney General or the Assembly's report said, by the Department of Justice. There are all these realities that are pretty widespread and associated with the Department of Justice, associated with the federal legal system, that he could be very easily um, uh, co-opted by Trump. if you were to get in the mayor's office. So that's really important to remind folks. But there's so much more, like what you mentioned with his support for the IDC and, frankly, against the Democrats in his time in the governor's office, any number of things. And it's really the challenge is how do you get past this name that people don't even necessarily associate with him? They think about his dad, they think about the last name, and it's just there. And how do you remind people all of his bad deeds, all of the ways that he's screwed New York City over, at the same time that we elevate, in my view, one of these five good apples or all five good apples that you should rank for mayor instead. And that, I'm sure we'll get to it, but these other candidates haven't started spending their largest of public matching funds, whether we're talking about Zoran, we're talking about Brad Lander, we're talking about Zellner Myrie, or even Scott Stringer, if you're a fan of his. I'm not, but they have a lot of money to spend, and they're going to start doing it, I would say, in the next month, because early voting starts early June. So our runway is right now. And so, while I'm concerned about some of the polls, I think the Siena one actually told a more interesting story than we've seen earlier. His numbers seem to go down. Having Eric Adams not in that poll, people thought it would go directly to him, and it didn't. 20% or so of people are undecided. And I don't even think the Siena poll did an accurate job at really following through with ranked choice voting processes. I think they actually did a footnote saying that they kind of extrapolated this. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. People have to be reminded of his high negatives and what a bad leader he is. It's also about getting the story out about these, in my view, five good apples, but the other candidates that can do the job and are ethical people and have the best interests of New York City at heart. And in the case of the five I'm thinking of are all current electeds.
Surprising to me, Lindsey, and I'd love to ask you about what you think of the Democratic Party response to this collectively amongst the senators. Our leader, Democratic leader, uh, Hakeem Jeffries is from New York. Um, it would seem that so many reasons to not, just morally and practically, to not let Cuomo win, to kind of coast through on name recognition. And it seems that they are backing away. They're cowardly responding to this. So what's your take?
I mean, they're cowards. I think it's a symptom of a broader failure in our party and in our politics across the country. Whether we're talking about Hakeem Jeffries, being the cool guy wearing his glasses saying, let the people choose, or Kirsten Gillibrand doing the same thing after spending her entire career supposedly supporting survivors, particularly in the military. I mean, I have words that I can't use on a podcast for it, but um, I can't dwell too much on how much it personally gives me grief, or is traumatic. But what I can say that I think is instructive now is that it pisses anyone off who's paying attention, because they say, "Oh my God, just this time ago you told him to resign, and now you're saying let people decide, but you thought it was important enough to make a statement these number of years ago, and now you're doing nothing." And I think it feeds into issues totally unrelated to what happened to me and other women and Andrew Cuomo. It's what people feel about our party and about our country not doing anything about the horrific things we see every day. So I always try to make it not about me, because it's not helpful. It's also kind of traumatic that way. If I can relate it back to what is happening across the country, people are really angry that their leaders seemingly, and I'm a lifelong Democrat, so I'll talk about my party, represent no values, have no courage, have no tenacity and endurance to do the right thing. I think that's why you see people being appreciative of congressional members flying to El Salvador, for example, to at least make a statement that we shouldn't just let people who have done nothing wrong be placed in gulags somewhere else in the world, or what could become, essentially black sites for the U.S. government to punish people. They want people to do something, and it's incredibly aggravating to see not just our leaders in the Senate and our congressional minority leader from New York kind of pass the buck, but the representatives who have decided to endorse him, or union leaders who have decided to endorse him, they're doing that because they're afraid of him. They're doing that because they see a particular personal benefit to being on his side when they think he's on a roll. And I can't think of something that's less needed at this moment in time than leaders, and I use that in quotations, electeds, and people with a platform and power doing things purely for personal benefit or out of fear. Those are the two things we don't need right now. In some ways, these are the things that have enabled bad guys like Trump to find their way to power because there's been too many years of this kind of BS, frankly. And I think people see through it, even if they're not really paying attention to, you know, the give and take of the mayor's race.
Well, the cowardice is especially striking because if we just roll back to the ancient past of 4 years ago, you, a young woman really starting her career, moving forward, you were an aide to the governor. You were one of the first to stand out. You had so much to lose. Um, and so it's hard for me to be sympathetic to a senator, Kristen Gillibrand, and others who are like, "Oh no, what if Cuomo wins?" And or these union leaders who are,
And they're basically saying it off the record. They're saying, I'm afraid. I mean, they won't all say it in public, but it's intimated even in articles that are quoting these people as supporting him. They're saying many are afraid of him. And so that's an off the record quotation, probably from the same people endorsing him. That's usually how, you're a journalist, you know how this works. They interview five people, they get on the record statements, and then they get off the record statements. Those are probably from some of the same people.
but they're also the same people who are like they want Republicans to stand up to Trump and like, oh, but they're afraid. And it's like, well, I mean, Cuomo's terrible, but I presumably he's not going to send a mob after. So, I mean, Trump is a level of danger. So you're not even willing to do just the bare minimum of like pushing against this machine. And that's really dispiriting.
It's I mean, they're careerist hacks. And I like to remind people every time they see me, I'm getting tired of seeing my face. I'm getting tired of seeing my name around this. There's a misnomer, I think, when women come forward about their own harassment or abuse that they want this connection. There's nothing I would like less than to have my name associated with this monster for the rest of my career. And so it was no small feat for me to come back in this arena and do this. I'd rather have the next time we're talking be about something not related to this monster. But all of that aside, I like to remind people that I am in a very privileged position of being able to do this. I had a platform. I've run for office. I've been in politics in my career. I was fairly senior. I have a good attorney that is fighting back against his legal abuse, even though I'm not even suing him. But I am just one person that, in this case, has the opportunity to represent so many women who don't have the opportunity to speak up right now. I'm talking about the other women, a woman half my age, basically, who was originally suing the governor for his harassment of her, same age as one of his daughters, I think, and who he sought gynecological records for with taxpayer money. Or the state trooper who is also younger than I don't know who she is. I've never known her, but who was going to protect him with her life. These are the kinds of women that I am speaking. I am able to speak up, not on their behalf, but I want you to know when it's just me, it's actually a lot more women who've been harmed. And then even beyond that, in these interceding years, the outreach and the women that I've built community with, this affects all of us because we're seeing this monster try to reputation wash himself. And as a result, people are saying, what does it mean about Me Too? Well, I will tell you this. We are here to fight. We're not going to let them win this battle of our own human rights and our own basic necessity to have um, agency in our workplace and respect. But I'm not. I'm here speaking a lot of the time alone in this particular moment. But there's so many other women who are in the same position. They just don't have the privilege of my platform, and I want to remind people of that because this monster isn't in a fight with me. He's in a fight with all the women and people who have fought hard and saying, I don't want to have anyone I know experience this. You know?
What's especially concerning about how the party establishment is responding is because, clearly some left leaning groups have opposed Cuomo, have come out, but this enables him to just spin this as ideological. So, like, of course, the AOC wing, for example, would oppose me. Why not? I'm they're to the left, and I'm more to the right than they are. But the collective, which is what we had in 2021, makes it clear that as a party, we find this behavior repulsive and you're unfit to lead. And they are not sort of doing that. And that sort of puts that position of where, unfortunately, you have to come out and have these, because yes, he is reputation washing, as you say. His campaign launch video which would be a Saturday Night Live sketch if not so obviously serious. He released it on Valentine's Day. He's holding a rose and there's women like it's like I had to watch it a couple times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. But and then he says, "Did I make mistakes? Some painfully. Definitely. And I believe I learned from them that I'm a better person for it. And I hope to show that every day," which is at simultaneously his spokesperson says, "From day one, the governor maintained he never harassed anyone. Years later, the facts have borne that out," which is, I don't believe is true. "New Yorkers aren't naive, understand an ugly political situation for exactly what it was." But there's no, this is so Trumpist because there's no, like, what was the political, what goal, what objective did any of you have to go after him?
Who are largely Democrats in his own party. You know, I mean, that doesn't make any sense. There is no benefit to any woman who is a Democrat and a rising, political figure in the Democratic Party coming against probably the most powerful governor in the country at the time. There's literally no benefit. And it's just kind of stupid to suggest otherwise. What I would also say is, he is very good at putting words out there that mean nothing. That's kind of one of his strong points. And him saying, I made mistakes. Uh, you will not hear him say that in any forum where people get to ask questions. He's only going to say that in a canned video where it can just stand alone like the bullshit that it is. I mean, it's so embarrassing to even think of Rich as a party as a person because he used to get made fun of by Cuomo himself so much. I can't believe this person has no sense of self respect to continue to, wash his laundry for him. However, it's completely counterintuitive. Forget whatever the BS he's spouting about how the truth has come out. I fully expect, in the case of the trooper, that she will be likely to win her case. There's voluminous evidence against this man. Hundreds of thousands of reams of documents that prove what he did. Over 40 on the record depositions, including mine, of all these examples. The assembly finding the same things, the Department of Justice going back and actually adding two victims, I think, that I don't even know who they are. This has gone through several legal processes. And him smearing me and the other women or saying that we're political somehow in doing this doesn't make it any less true. I'll tell you what is true. He has spent over $60 million of the taxpayer money on this and fighting against the nursing home deaths, families that are suing him and continue to file lawsuits against him. He's using taxpayer money to do all of that. And I don't think that says any kind of regret or mistake. And so I just think it's complete BS. And the only thing he has going for him is his last name and the feeling of fear that he elicits from people around him. Those are the two things. He's not running a good campaign. He's using Chat GPT to create policy, and when he is found out for doing that, he blames that on a former colleague of mine, Paul Francis, who only has use of one arm, and says that that's why he used ChatGPT. And Paul Francis is not a housing guy, but he was supposed to have created the housing policy. Cuomo somehow made an error that four other campaigns did not make in misfiling for public matching funds that I did not make when I was a first time candidate running for public matching funds. I'd never been in a public matching fund race, and I didn't know anything about it, and I was able to get that done correctly. I mean, I think there's some broader lie that he's papering over with that one. But he's not running a good campaign. He's not a good manager, which is the one argument that I think a few people are trying to make. So what? He's a bad guy. He's a great manager. No, he's not. The only thing that he's good at is instilling fear in people and lying. So it takes too long for you to find out just how bad of a manager he is.
And you are kind of been helping, I've seen on social media, to sort of rally folks to understand what the options are, who the other candidate, because if it was Cuomo and Adams, that's a pretty bleak, but there are other candidates, there's ways to rank them so that you don't wind up that Cuomo can kind of similar to how Adams won.
People have got to rank five. We've got to rank five. It's Do you want me to explain? You have to go through. I was thinking about how to deal with this, particularly since ranked choice voting is kind of new to me. And we all just had it in the last mayoral election. And, you're going to get to rank five people for mayor. And the first thing to do is make sure you don't rank Cuomo so that he doesn't get any of your vote. He doesn't get your first vote. He doesn't get your second round vote. He doesn't get your third round vote. He can't get any of those if you want to keep him out of the mayor's office. And instead, what you have to do is five good apples. My good apples, in no particular order, are Zoran Momdani, Brad Lander, Zellner Myrie, Adrian Adams, and Jessica Ramos. Now, again, those are not in order at this point. There may be a point in the election where primary where I specify a little bit more. But the reason for that is how ranked choice voting works is there will be a first round of votes. So whoever you voted for first will get that one vote. And the lowest vote getter, as you go forward, gets taken out of the process. And so whoever your next vote for the next round was goes to that second candidate. So essentially, you will have a process where even if your favorite first person is, I don't, one candidate, you've got to think about the fourth vote you did and the fifth vote you did, because it is going to likely make it there to that fifth round where it's going to matter who your next candidate vote was for. And you do not want to be in a position where if you only, let's say you only rank Brad or you only rank Zoran, for example, and somehow one of those candidates isn't in one of the later rounds, you have no say any longer who's going to be the mayor. And I will say, when you're running against with someone with such a big name like Andrew Cuomo, and who does have some vestigial support, you're running up against him. These other candidates need to have this month to make sure we know who they are, who everyone knows who they are, so you can prioritize how you want to rank them. But they've got to do that job, and they're running against someone who has 100% name recognition. So you absolutely have to keep them entirely off your ballot and rank five people who you can live with being mayor. And there are five. I mean, there's more than five, but there's five that I at least feel very good about and have had conversations with or met with most, if not all of them.
And despite perceptions of New York, and I lived there for about 15 years, it is not during the Giuliani and Bloomberg terms. It tends to elect fairly right of center mayors, in my experience, and I think that there's so beyond just Cuomo's name recognition, perhaps the concern also is that his name presents stability. He's going to come in and deal with homelessness and deal with crime and some of these issues that have been raised. And I'm not going to vote for a kind of a more overtly liberal candidate. So and I'm not going to put you in a position of having to endorse anyone, but just are there options if people are concerned? Are there options that aren't Adams or Cuomo, who are, you would say, mainstream center left candidates?
For the number one issue that I saw in a recent poll was housing, right? So let's put Mr. Chat GPT housing plan aside, who's literally beholden to real estate. If you look at his PAC, Fix the City PAC that is going to support him, it's entirely of real estate billionaires, basically, and a few other billionaires and a few other real estate types. So he is not going to be working for you. He is going to be working for the developers, who will get some percentage affordable to get their big towers and things that they want built. Scott Reckler, the likes of them. Let's put him aside because that's total BS. Housing, whether we talk about Brad, we talk about Zellner, who's put out a very comprehensive housing plan, or we talk about Zoran, who's also talking about this, they all have put more thought into how to approach housing than the former three-term governor has. So that's just one issue. I loved a plan recently that Zoran put out about dealing with mental illness and engaging people with that, with issues like that, aside from direct police interaction. Because one of the biggest issues we have at the street level is how to grapple with the mental illness crisis that we have and substance abuse and the like. And you have serious people in these cases who all want to deal with the problems people have. People have a sense in some areas of the city that it is unsafe. And I guarantee you, Brad has been in a citywide office. He actually knows this city, how to deal with it. Uh, the governor has never dealt with managing this city, has no sense of it, and he won't be effective at managing it. The one reason why he was in some ways effective at managing the state was because he would constantly screw over different areas of the state to control access to, getting the budget together, or constantly screwing over the city. One of our biggest successes that we had from a more to kind of bring up the point you were mentioning earlier, from probably one of our more progressive mayors, Bill de Blasio, was pre-K and 3K, and that was, his plan. It's one of it. Cuomo made it next to impossible to get that done, and that's been one of the things that has been a net positive for the city of New York. In many cases, he stood in the way of these plans. Congestion pricing, which maybe people have been unhappy about to a certain extent, it has been, um, for by all accounts, from a policy perspective, a huge win, and is generating money to fix our MTA. He ended up wish-washing both ways on that and being against it. This is not a serious person. He's just going with the wind, whatever he thinks you find the problem to be. Whereas, as I said, Brad or Zellner has been a state senator who actually has dealt with how to engage in the community. We talk about Adrian Adams, who's the literal city council speaker and has actually had to command the city. To me, if you think about it, it's kind of an incredibly bizarre proposition to think that someone who has shown no interest in the city, has actually spent a majority of his management career screwing it over, is going to have a better capacity to come in and lead it than the people who've actually been dealing with this largest for a long period of time. And New York City is its own beast. It's not an easy job. I think that's the reason why so many people, they call it, to some extent, the graveyard of ambition, because it is not an easy job to build off of, because you have to end up making all these complicated decisions, negotiating union contracts, dealing with policing versus, fighting in Albany for city education. It is not going to go well if he's mayor, when especially his former colleague, who was one of the people who settled how poorly he did in harassing all of us women, they're going to be going at it, and he's not going to have the power. He's not going to have power vis-a-vis Albany, whether we're talking about the Senate or the Assembly. I think this weekend there was a great piece in the New York Times about his act that actually covered his lack of competence. And God bless her, Senator Liz Kruger is always on point, where she said, I worry that some people think that he's competent. I mean, that's her way of saying he's not. And I would say Liz Kruger is probably one of our most apt, able leaders in Albany and for the city in understanding and fighting for what we need. And he's got no experience there. He's only got experience in taking things away from the city and its leaders. I mean, he is the reason why Bill de Blasio could not shut down New York to community spread when he wanted to. He was forced to hold off on that, and that also, spread COVID much more quickly, like wildfire. He is a big reason why he is the reason why vaccines weren't being issued at Citi Field when there had been a plan to do this for weeks, and it could have protected so many more people, simply because he didn't want Bill de Blasio or anyone in the city to get credit. I mean, this is a person who does not care about outcomes. He simply cares about his own press ego. And, I don't want it to come to this, because I don't want us to be harmed and our most vulnerable to be harmed in the city. He will absolutely fail as mayor. There's no question in my mind. But I would like to prevent that, because if he fails as mayor, it's our most vulnerable and the most serious issues that are going to get harmed even more. So we're really trying to head that entire problem off and just make sure he doesn't get to City Hall.
That's just so important. I think well, as you say and described very well, he will fail. New York has had a string of not successful mayors lately, and he it seemed as if people had forgotten, like, in a weird way, as if the reason he resigned was the only reason, and that he was like firing on all cylinders prior to that, but he wasn't. I mean, as had described, some of the issues that were there, the issues that had kind of screwed the Democratic Party, would I think some choices he made kind of resulted in, like, the New York House races kind of going the way they did.
He's a big reason why we lost the majority. And I would say I would like to think that what happened to his own staff and how he abused his own staff and abused his power was the reason why so many people were willing to come forward and say this man needs to be held accountable and either be impeached or go. But I think a lot of it has to do with this broader context of what he had been doing. I mean, he'd been abusing his power at the time. You know, Ron Kim has now been scared into silence at the very least, or saying he's open to him, which is because he received more calls from the former governor. But you know, he was calling and threatening people. His staff were calling and threatening people about speaking up or critiquing them about the official COVID death numbers, you know, or about the nursing home policy. But it's not even just that. I mean, one of his closest former interlocker served time in federal prison for corruption charges. Many people who worked for him faced charges and prison time for bid rigging and for creating a process in New York where the most wealthy and successful who were supporting the governor were also the people who received the most benefits. You know, I think there are countless examples of that. Stephanie Miner, who was the former mayor of Syracuse, she just came forward to say that he was constantly screwing her over, and he actually kissed her unsolicited. She said it wasn't a romantic or sexual kiss, but he still did it without, you know, he still did that and sexually harassed her as a power play. This man did this kind of stuff all over the state, and everyone knew. I even think Lieutenant Governor knew, who is now the governor. But it was when all of these stacking blocks came together to say, this is enough. This man, what are we doing here? And nothing has changed there except people are afraid of him again. And that is so disappointing to see. But you know, I and a bunch of other women and a bunch of other families, a bunch of other nonprofit individuals, some of our, you know, over 160 political clubs, local leaders have all stood forward together and said, well, we're not going to take this again. So while I sometimes feel alone, I'm really not. And it is inspiring to see how much people are working together. I mean, without sharing too much, I have never had this opportunity to kind of engage with different candidates, to work across different, you know, groups of people and community groups and parts of different counties in the city. And that is all because the people involved know what a bad guy this is and how bad he would be for our city. I always wanted that in my career, and it wasn't open to me because first I was working for this monster and then I was out on my own. That's inspiring to see. You know, after he got his endorsements, that for the most part are people we weren't surprised by. 160 political clubs and district leaders and county committee members and local electeds. Today, Nydia Velasquez and you know, many others have come and said we're not, you know, we're endorsing real leaders, and they're not Andrew Cuomo. Now, it is a real task. They've got to spend the money they have, and they really need to start earlier than I think the traditional campaign lines would suggest. And I've made this pitch to most of them, and I'm going to say it publicly so that you can tell them to whoever ends up watching this or listening. We need, in my view, some of these well-moneyed with public matching fund candidates to start spending some of that money a bit earlier than they might otherwise. That might be counterintuitive to them from traditional campaigning, because you're running against a guy who has 100% name ID. And the only way to tear him down is to remind people what a bad guy he is. But my sense is that has to happen to a certain extent now through May, and not simply in the last few weeks of the election. It's not just about turning people out. It's about reminding them what a bad guy the alternative is, and as they elevate their own names. So, I mean, that is a big job to do, but that's why there's so many of us who are trying to do that work now.
Yeah, and it's terrible that part of reminding how bad Cuomo is involves sort of having to relive this trauma. You know, and I'm not going to ask you about it. I will include. I mean, there's interviews to you. There's your video testimony is out there.
I'm totally fine with people seeing that. I don't ever want to see it again. People are always like, I watched that last night. I'm like, great for you. But you know, yeah, but I understand that people, you know, listen, it's public. So I also wish none of this had ever happened to me, but it is part of, you know, what people need to be reminded of. And They don't need to like me. They don't need to think I'm some perfect person. They don't need to be sympathetic to me. Keep in mind that I am just a proxy for so many other women. Not just that he abused and came forward, but ones we don't know. Because part of what he's doing now with the $60 million isn't simply about trying to use lawfare against the women he harassed and to punish us, but he's trying to punish all of the people who spoke up against him so that more don't come forward. If you think that it's only a dozen or so women who he harassed, then you got another thing coming. This before the report came out, I knew it was going to be very bad if they spent any time looking at the truth, because this man doesn't know how to be appropriate with women. He just simply does not. If he finds you attractive or if he finds you really unattractive, he has no way to treat you appropriately. I don't know if you psychologically, I try not to invest too much time in figuring out the why, but he's a very bad guy. And there's so many more people who he's abused, right? Like it is funny. So like every time I think, oh, this does suck. This sucks. Like, some of his supporters, including his sister, the New York Times found, really have spent the last several years harassing and smearing all of us, which is disgusting. But if your play is to try and scare people that you abused, then you know that you did it, right? Like if your play is to be like, no, she's the worst person on the planet. Well, what does that have to do with you doing these things, right? I mean, it's so transparent. Like, again, people don't have to like me. I mean, it would be nice if they did, but as I get older, you know, I'm other side of 40 now. I'm hoping I'm caring less about being likable. I think it's one of the great problems women have, but it's not about that. There's so many women he did this to that came forward, and there are so many more that never came forward because they saw us made an example of. And the only thing that makes me so happy is probably like every day or every few days, I get an email from a lot of women, but not just women, saying, I really appreciate what you did. And I'm thinking about doing the same thing in this situation. I got one this morning. We need a whole bunch of people to do that. I don't want the world for the rest of my daughter's life to be about women coming forward about abuse. That'll suck if that's the world that she encounters. We just need to create an environment where you're not just doing this stuff and not being held accountable and then coming back and harming the very same people and pretending like nothing happened. So this really does matter, even if you don't care about New York City, which you should, because it's our biggest, most important, complicated city in the country, and the world is watching too. We just can't have it be run by a sociopathic, liar who, at the end of the day, hates himself. I mean, you don't treat people like this if you like yourself.
Yeah, and I know, the New York Times was covering this and had alluded to something about how maybe Me Too movement has or fast, as if it was like kind of a fad, like superhero movies or something. I think there is sort of this importance. I mean, after Trump's victory, and then in here, I think it seems very important to sort of disprove that, to not, and also to clarify that, because of however the Me Too backlash, as they called it, there was this idea that just existing in the world around women, you were going to get, lose your job or lose everything. And as you said, this is a very bad guy. Like this, he had done, and again, as I will have links to articles where it's detailed, but the, he, people were coming forward about behaviors he did that I consider sexual assault, or I get beyond. I mean, harassment, and can be very just like, you know asking a woman out, compared to, no, no, no. I mean, he was getting physical.
Groping women, yes, yes. And to that point, one of the things that he erroneously and his supporters try to bring up is there were no charges were filed against him. Well, I've unfortunately had this great introduction to the legal world that I never wanted to have. I've never had a lawyer in my life. I never dealt with lawyers. I didn't want to be a lawyer. So I feel a little bit like Aaron Brockovich learning about it. But there's criminal court and there's civil court. And while criminal courts, 5 DAs decided not to press forward with charges, in part because they asked some of the women if they wanted. I was asked by the Manhattan DA if I wanted to press charges, and I did not want to. There were so many personal reasons why. But 3 civil cases were brought forth against him, and 2 continue forward. And one additional one, Charlotte Bennett decided to stop pursuing him in civil court because he basically made her want to die in how he harassed her legally. But she's still pursuing her case against the state for violation of her civil rights. There are still 3 active cases against him or related to him in civil court. And for those who don't know, sexual harassment is typically ends up being adjudicated in civil court. In part that's because of the short history of holding people accountable for sexual harassment, because of the threshold for getting a guilty verdict. But he is actively being pursued. The reason why he spent $60 million in part is because he's continuing to try and litigate against these very women who are suing him. I am not one of those women because it's just a personal decision I made that I didn't want to deal with this monster anymore. Lo and behold, look where I am now. But at least I'm trying to prevent him from being mayor of my daughter's city and all of the girls in her Girl Scouts troop, all of it. But I mean, he's going to be found guilty in civil court if there's a fair trial in any of these cases, which I'm expecting that there should be. He's going to be found guilty, and his supporters are, his staff supporters, Rich and others, are either not smart enough to know that how the legal system works, or they're just incredibly bad people in trying to lie to the public about the fact that he is still very much under legal scrutiny.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me about this, Lindsey. And before we go, is there any other call to actions for people watching or listening who, even if they don't live in New York, that they can do to sort of prevent this outcome?
Sure. So, I think word of mouth really matters. Was it 2 weekends ago? There was the hands off, rallies across the country. Was that 2 weekends ago? All the days are blending together against Trump and all the things he's doing. And there was a massive one in New York City. Hands off our democracy, hands off our immigrants, hands off women, all of it. I need people to know that some subset of the people rallying for that are consider voting for Cuomo because they think he's a competent manager. And you may know someone like that in your life. They may be your mother, they may be your cousin, they may be your friend, they may be your former colleague in New York City. And so if you know anyone, whether you're in New York City or not, I need you to talk to those family members, those loved ones, those friends, and explain that this is not only a bad guy, but an incompetent manager. And I think, you'll share some of the links, some of our conversation prove that. So even when people think that if they don't live in the city, they don't have a role to play, you can help get the word out. And in a lot of cases, when I think the most famous example of this, in many ways, Obama was brought to the White House because young people were so excited about him that they told everyone else in their lives. And even if they were more inclined to be more, traditional or less inclined to see the young, new, smart person and we're going to go more traditional, they were listening. People are going to listen to you if you talk to them. And not only, you got to start with, don't rank this bad man who's an incompetent person and a liar, Cuomo, but then think about 5 people to rank. And in my view, it's Brad Lander, Zelnor Myrie, Zoran Mamdani, Adrienne Adams, and Jessica Ramos. Again, I'm just mixing up the order because I'm not saying anything about the ranking exactly at this point. No to Cuomo. Have these conversations with people in your lives and rank 5 good people that will be a good mayor. And then, of course, amplify the messages and the outreach of those 5 good people. You can do phone banking. You can do, financial support for these folks. You can support Dream NYC. You can support the Anti-Cuomo PAC. All of these things I talk about on my Instagram page, on my Twitter, and on Blue Sky. Others do as well. So please do not assume anything, especially if you live in New York City. Talk to that, during COVID, people said, reach out to the people in your community. You got to do it now to prevent this bad guy from becoming our mayor and screwing up our city again.
Thank you so much. On
Thank
a
you.
personal level, I lived in New York. My wife and best friend are currently
Oh,
visiting there right now. I met my wife in New York. It's a city
ah,
we love, and I do not want this man to be mayor of the city.
no,
On
bad guy.
a, so thank you so much for everything you're doing, Lindsey Boylan. Please find her on social media. I'll have links there as well. And she's been helping folks in New York and outside to sort of prevent this outcome and elect someone that New Yorkers can be proud of. And again, thank you for listening and watching, and we'll catch you again next time. Take care.